I always thought family meant unconditional love until my diagnosis shattered that illusion on a rainy Portland morning. The doctor's words hung in the sterile examination room like a physical presence. You have Grayson syndrome, a rare autoimmune disorder. Dr. Peters's face softened with practiced compassion as she explained the long road ahead: aggressive treatments, potential organ involvement, and a complete upheaval of the life I'd carefully built. I sat there in stunned silence, the examination, paper crinkling beneath my trembling hands, trying to process how 3 minutes of medical terminology had just rewritten my entire future. My husband Tom squeezed my hand as we listened to treatment options, but his grip felt mechanical, his eyes focused somewhere beyond Dr. Peters's shoulder. When she mentioned the potential year-long treatment plan and uncertain prognosis, I felt his fingers twitch almost imperceptibly. Still, I leaned into him as we walked to the car, grateful for his solid presence beside me in this moment of absolute terror. "We'll get through this together," he said as rain pelted the windshield, his voice steady but somehow hollow. I believed him because I needed to, because after 8 years of marriage I thought I knew the man sitting next to me. I didn't yet understand that his words were merely an automatic response, a placeholder while he calculated the cost of staying. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The first signs of trouble appeared 3 days later. I'd spent those initial 72 hours in a haze of research and panic, alternately crying and making lists of questions for the specialists we would soon meet. Tom had been unusually quiet, disappearing into his home office for hours on urgent work calls. When I finally sought him out that evening, desperate for comfort, I found him methodically packing a suitcase. "What are you doing?" I asked, my voice sounding foreign even to my own ears. Tom didn't look up, just continued folding his dress shirts with the same precision he applied to everything in his life. "I think we need some space, Becca. Just temporarily." Space? The word felt absurd in my mouth. "I've just been diagnosed with a potentially life-threatening condition, and you need space?" He finally met my eyes, and what I saw chilled me more than any medical prognosis. There was no anguish there, no conflict, just a clear, calculated decision that had already been made. This changes everything: the treatments, the medical bills, the uncertainty. I didn't sign up for this. I stood in the doorway of our bedroom, the room we had painted together laughing just last year, and felt the floor tilt beneath me. "You literally did sign up for this. In sickness and in health. Those were your exact words." His expression didn't change. "Those are just things people say, Becca. Nobody actually expects to cash in on that part." 48 hours later, Tom moved into a downtown apartment, taking our joint savings and leaving me with a stack of medical paperwork and the first of what would become countless insurance denials. But Tom's abandonment was just the beginning of my family's calculated exodus. My brother Daniel called a week after Tom left. I answered eagerly, hoping for the comfort of my big brother, the same person who had fiercely protected me throughout our childhood. "Becca, I've been thinking," he started, his business-like tone already dimming my hope. "With Tom gone, the medical expenses will be significant. It might make sense to sell the townhouse now before things get worse." "Worse?" I repeated, struggling to follow his logic through my medication fog. "Well, your credit is going to take a hit with all this. Dad and I think it's best to liquidate while you can still get a good price. The family business could use some reinvestment right now, and we could structure it as a loan against your proceeds." I clutched the phone tighter, trying to process that my brother and father had been discussing my financial situation without me. "You want me to sell my home and loan you the money while I'm fighting for my life? Don't be dramatic, Becca. We're trying to help you make smart decisions. Your treatment means you can't work full-time, so the mortgage will become unsustainable. Anyway." The conversation ended with me hanging up, my hands shaking with something beyond medical symptoms: rage, betrayal, and the dawning realization that my family viewed me as a financial calculation rather than a person in crisis. My parents' betrayal came more gradually, wrapped in concern and practicality. Initially, my mother Maggie visited daily, bringing bland soups and endless advice about alternative treatments she'd found online. But as the reality of my long-term needs became clear, her visits grew shorter and less frequent. "We're just not equipped to be caretakers at our age," she explained one afternoon, not quite meeting my eyes. "And your father's blood pressure goes up every time we discuss the financial aspects of your situation." "I'm not asking you to be caretakers," I said, fighting against the tears that constantly seemed to hover just behind my eyes. "I just need my mom and dad right now." "Well, we need to think about our retirement too, Rebecca. Your father worked hard to build that construction business, and these medical situations can drain families completely. We have to be practical." Practical. The word became a knife they all wielded. Tom, Daniel, my parents, and finally my sister Sarah, who called only to tell me she couldn't have me at her baby shower in my condition because it would worry the grandparents and shift attention from her special day. Within 2 months of my diagnosis, my support system had crumbled entirely. The people who had claimed to love me most had each performed their own cost-benefit analysis and found me wanting. The harsh truth settled into my bones alongside my illness. To them, I was no longer the successful marketing executive, the reliable daughter, the fun sister, the supportive wife. I was a liability, a drain, a problem to be managed from a safe distance. The day I truly understood this was the day I received the certified letter from Tom's attorney, Theodore Wilson. It outlined a divorce settlement that could only be described as predatory, attempting to classify my medical condition as a pre-existing situation that voided certain financial obligations. The legal jargon swam before my eyes, but the message was clear. Tom wasn't just leaving, he was trying to ensure. He walked away with everything while I was at my most vulnerable. That night, sitting in the townhouse that suddenly felt too large and too empty, I allowed myself to fully feel the weight of abandonment. Surrounded by insurance denials, medical bills, and legal threats, I sobbed until physical exhaustion finally granted me sleep. It was my lowest point, but as I would later realize, sometimes you need to hit bottom before you can push yourself back to the surface. The first small lifeline came from an unexpected place. Maya Rodriguez, a colleague I'd always worked with occasionally but never considered a close friend, showed up at my door with groceries and a determined expression. "I heard what happened," she said simply, moving past me into the kitchen and unloading fresh fruits and vegetables. "My mother had lupus. I know the drill. You need rides to treatment, someone to take notes at doctor appointments, and probably help understanding the insurance nightmare." I stood in my own kitchen, watching this near stranger efficiently organizing my refrigerator, and felt the first tiny crack in the ice that had formed around my heart. "Why would you do this for me? We barely know each other." Maya looked up, her dark eyes serious. "Because this happened to my mom, and nobody showed up for her. That's not happening to you on my watch." With Maya's help, I began navigating the complex medical system. She drove me to appointments when the medication made it unsafe for me to drive, took detailed notes during consultations, and spent evenings researching clinical trials and treatment options. When I was too exhausted or sick from treatments to cook, she organized a meal train among colleagues, many of whom I'd never expected to step up. Meanwhile, I fought the legal battle with Tom with what little energy I could spare. I found Patricia Winters, an attorney who specialized in divorces involving medical crises, and who agreed to work with me on a flexible payment plan. "What Tom is trying to do is reprehensible but not uncommon," Patricia explained during our first meeting. "People reveal who they truly are in crisis. Our job now is to protect you from further harm." The divorce proceedings dragged on for months, coinciding with the most physically challenging phase of my treatment. There were days I could barely get out of bed, when the medications meant to heal me seemed to be destroying me instead. The side effects were brutal: hair loss, extreme fatigue, painful rashes, digestive distress that left me unable to eat solid food for weeks at a time. Through it all, Tom's attorney kept filing motions to expedite the process, knowing I was too ill to fully engage. They attempted to schedule critical hearings on days I had treatment, tried to force the sale of our townhouse while I was hospitalized for an infection, and repeatedly demanded medical documentation that was invasive and largely irrelevant to our asset division. "He's trying to wear you down," Patricia warned. "He's hoping you'll be too exhausted to fight, that you'll accept whatever he offers just to end this." She was right. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. There were moments I considered surrendering, when the combined battle against my disease and my husband's legal attacks felt insurmountable. But somewhere beneath the medication fog and physical pain, a new determination was forming, a resolve that surprised even me with its intensity. 6 months into my treatment, I received my first piece of good news in what felt like forever. Dr. Peters's face actually broke into a smile during our appointment. "The latest tests show significant improvement, Rebecca. The treatment protocol is working better than we anticipated." For the first time since my diagnosis, I allowed myself to consider a future beyond illness and betrayal. That same afternoon, I contacted a realtor. If Tom wanted the townhouse sold, fine, but it would happen on my terms, not his. The market was surprisingly strong, and the modern, well-maintained property in Rosewood attracted multiple offers within days. I used part of the proceeds to secure a modest apartment in Selwood, an older neighborhood with character and walkability, important considerations given my still limited energy. The remainder I set aside for medical expenses and legal fees, creating a small financial cushion that eased some of my most immediate anxieties. With stable housing secured and my health showing signs of improvement, I turned my attention to rebuilding some semblance of a professional life. My position at Greenfield Marketing had been eliminated during a restructuring that coincidentally occurred 2 weeks after I began treatment. Another betrayal that had once seemed devastating, but now barely registered on my recalibrated scale of pain. Working full-time remained impossible, but I began taking on small freelance projects that I could manage from home during my better days. The work was far below my previous executive level, but it provided both income and, more importantly, purpose, a reminder that I was more than my illness, that my skills and experience still had value. During this period of cautious rebuilding, my family maintained their distance. Occasionally, my mother would call with performative concern, asking surface questions about my health, but quickly changing the subject when I offered actual details. My father never called at all. Daniel limited his communication to impersonal emails about financial considerations, while Sarah sent birth announcements and holiday cards that felt like dispatches from a different universe, one where families actually supported each other. Their absence hurt, but the pain had dulled into something resembling acceptance. I was learning to build a new support network of people who showed up not out of obligation, but out of genuine care. Maya and her husband, several former colleagues, my neighbors in Selwood who brought me homemade bread and offered to walk with me as I slowly regained strength. Then came the letter that would unexpectedly alter the trajectory of my life. I nearly discarded it as junk mail. The expensive cream-colored envelope addressed in unfamiliar handwriting seemed like a credit. Card solicitation, only a nagging sense of order, and the fact that it was a low-energy day, prompted me to open it before tossing it away. Inside was a letter from the office of Jonathan Blackwell, an attorney representing the estate of Professor Richard Hamilton. The name triggered immediate recognition. Professor Hamilton had been my mentor during graduate school, a brilliant, eccentric man who had taken a particular interest in my career, staying in touch through occasional emails and coffee meetings, long after I'd graduated. According to the letter, Professor Hamilton had passed away 3 months earlier. What stunned me was the next paragraph. He had left me a substantial portion of his estate, including his intellectual property rights, real estate holdings, and investment portfolio. The total value was estimated at just over $32 million. I read the letter 3 times, convinced I was hallucinating, a not uncommon side effect of some of my medications. But the details remained consistent, along with a request to contact Mr. Blackwell's office to begin the transfer process. With shaking hands, I called the number provided and was connected to Jonathan Blackwell himself, who confirmed that yes, Professor Hamilton had indeed named me as his primary beneficiary. Yes, the amount was accurately stated. And yes, he understood. This must come as a shock. "Richard spoke of you often," Blackwell explained, his voice warm with genuine emotion. "He had no children of his own, and he greatly admired both your professional achievements and your character. He followed your career quite closely and was deeply distressed to learn of your health challenges this past year." "But I had no idea," I whispered, still struggling to process this information. "We kept in touch, but we weren't what I'd call close in recent years. Richard was a private man, but he was also an excellent judge of character. He made this decision with great consideration." There was a pause before Blackwell continued. "There's something else you should know. Richard revised his will approximately 8 months ago, after learning of your illness. He specifically noted that he wanted to ensure you would have the resources for the best possible care without financial constraints." The tears came then, not from shock or gratitude, though both were overwhelming, but from the stark contrast this gesture presented. A man who had no biological obligation to me, who was essentially a former teacher, had shown more concern for my well-being than the family and husband who had vowed to love me. The inheritance process took several months, during which my health continued to improve. Dr. Peters cautiously used the word remission during one of our appointments, though she emphasized the need for ongoing monitoring and maintenance treatment. By the time the funds were finally transferred to the accounts established by the financial advisors Blackwell had recommended, I was physically stronger than I had been in over a year. With this unexpected financial security came something even more valuable: freedom. Freedom from the constant stress of medical bills and housing insecurity. Freedom to prioritize my health without sacrificing everything else. Freedom to reimagine my future on my own terms. The first major decision I made was purchasing a home, not just any home, but an expansive estate in Lake Oswego overlooking the water. The property featured lush gardens, a light-filled main house with accessible features for my lower energy days, and a separate guest house that could be converted into a home office. It was extravagant, perhaps unnecessarily so, but after months of illness and uncertainty, the security of owning such a substantial space felt like emotional as well as financial investment in my future. My second decision was more practical, but equally meaningful. During my illness, I had discovered significant gaps in the resources available to patients with chronic and rare conditions. The medical information was fragmented, the support systems inadequate, and the administrative burdens overwhelming, particularly for those too ill to effectively advocate for themselves. Drawing on my marketing background and newly painful personal experience, I developed the concept for WellPath, a comprehensive platform that would integrate medical information management, insurance navigation, treatment tracking, and community support for patients with complex health conditions. I assembled a team of developers, medical professionals, patient advocates, and marketing experts. Maya, whose support had been unfailing throughout my illness, became my chief operating officer. Within 18 months, WellPath launched to immediate, Acclaim in the healthcare community, addressing a critical need that larger healthcare companies had overlooked. The app's success exceeded even my most optimistic projections. Medical centers began partnering with us to offer the platform to their patients. Investment offers poured in, though I maintained majority control, unwilling to compromise the patient-centered, mission-for-profit motives. Feature stories in medical journals and technology publications raised the company's profile further, often highlighting my personal journey as the inspiration behind the innovation. It was one such profile in Portland Business Monthly that apparently caught my family's attention. The article, titled, "From Patient to Pioneer: How Rebecca Mitchell Transformed Her Health Crisis into a Healthcare Revolution," included photographs of me at my Lake Oswego estate and in our sleek downtown offices. The first contact came from my brother Daniel. A text message, casual as if we'd spoken last week instead of nearly 2 years ago. "Impressive article, sis. Didn't realize things were going so well for you. We should catch up sometime." I stared at the message for a long time, noting the carefully neutral tone that neither acknowledged his absence during my illness nor expressed genuine pleasure at my recovery. It was a reconnaissance mission, testing whether the doors he had closed might now be reopened on more advantageous terms. My sister Sarah followed with an email invitation to her son's first birthday party. The nephew I had never met because she had deemed my illness too depressing for her pregnancy and early motherhood. The invitation came with a chatty update about her life and a postscript mentioning she'd love to hear more about this exciting business venture. My parents were more direct. My father called one evening, his gruff voice attempting warmth that hadn't been there when I needed it most. "Your mother and I have been thinking it's time to put the past behind us. Families should stick together, especially in times of success." Not in times of illness, apparently, but definitely in times of success. I listened politely to each overture, responding with non-committal courtesy. Yes, life had taken some unexpected turns. Yes, my health was much improved. Yes, perhaps we could meet sometime. The conversations left me hollow, a familiar ache resurging where I thought healing had occurred. That night, I sat in my garden overlooking the lake, watching the sunset paint the water in shades of gold and crimson. The beauty before me contrasted sharply with the ugliness of what these interactions revealed. That to my family, I was only worth reconnecting with now that I had something they wanted access to. Yet amid the hurt, a new thought emerged. Perhaps this was an opportunity for closure I hadn't realized I needed. Perhaps facing them directly, on my terms, from my position of strength, would finally allow me to fully release the pain of their abandonment. The plan formed with surprising clarity. I would host a dinner, not just any dinner, but an elegant garden party at my estate. I would invite them all: Tom, Daniel and his wife, Sarah and her husband, my parents. I would create the perfect setting for the family reconciliation they clearly envisioned, though my purpose would be entirely different from what they anticipated. The invitations went out the following week. Thick cream cardstock with gold. Embossing announced a family reconciliation dinner to be held at my Lake Oswego estate. I specified formal attire and requested RSVPs, playing fully into the social performance I knew would appeal to them. The responses came quickly, all affirmative, all expressing variations of delight at the prospect of reuniting our close-knit family. Reading between the lines of their enthusiastic acceptances, I could almost see the calculations happening, the networking opportunities with my new business connections, the potential financial advantages of renewing ties with a suddenly wealthy relative, the social cash of association with a successful entrepreneur. As the date approached, I channeled my nervous energy into ensuring every detail was perfect. The gardens were immaculately groomed, the table on the terrace set with fine china and crystal, the menu carefully selected to showcase understated luxury. I chose my outfit with equal care, an elegant blue dress that complemented my now short hair, grown back with different texture after chemotherapy, and the delicate scar on my collarbone from my port. On the evening of the dinner, I stood at the entrance to my property, watching as they arrived one by one. My brother Daniel pulled up in a new luxury SUV, his wife Jennifer looking uncomfortable beside him. Sarah and her husband followed shortly. After, leaving their son with a sitter, this wasn't an occasion for children after all, but for adult reconciliations and opportunities. My parents arrived together, my father's eyes taking inventory of the property even as he moved to embrace me. And finally Tom, alone and overdressed, carrying a bouquet of lilies. Flowers I had never particularly liked, though he should have known that after 8 years of marriage. I accepted their awkward hugs and air kisses, the compliments on my home and appearance, the expressions of how wonderful it was to be together again. I guided them through the gardens to the terrace overlooking the lake, where champagne awaited, in crystal flutes catching the golden light of early evening. "A toast," my father proposed once everyone held a glass, clearly appointing himself the patriarch of this gathering. To family coming together again, and to Rebecca's incredible success. They raised their glasses, smiling at me with expressions that betrayed their true feelings, not joy at my well-being, but satisfaction at having correctly repositioned themselves to benefit from my changed circumstances. I raised my glass as well, but didn't drink. "Before we continue," I said, my voice steady and clear in the evening air, "I want to thank you all for coming tonight. It's been a remarkable 3 years since my diagnosis, a journey that transformed not just my health, but my understanding of what truly matters in life." They nodded encouragingly, mistaking my preamble for the beginning of a reconciliation speech. My mother dabbed at her eye preemptively, rehearsing emotion she hadn't shown when I'd actually needed her support. 3 years ago, when Dr. Peters told me I had Grayson syndrome, my world changed in an instant. I learned that my body was attacking itself, that the treatment would be grueling, and that my future was suddenly uncertain. I paused, looking at each of them in turn. But the most painful lesson came in the weeks that followed, when I learned exactly how conditional my family's love actually was. The atmosphere shifted perceptibly, smiles faltering as they realized this wasn't proceeding as they had anticipated. "Tom," I said, turning to my ex-husband, who froze with his champagne halfway to his lips. "You left 3 days after my diagnosis, emptied our joint accounts, and then had your attorney argue that my illness constituted a form of financial fraud against you." I shifted my gaze to my brother. "Daniel, you suggested I sell my home while I was still reeling from my diagnosis and Tom's departure, and then proposed I loan the proceeds to the family business. Next, my sister. Sarah, you excluded me from family events because my illness was too depressing and might shift attention from your special moments. Finally, my parents. And Mom and Dad, you decided that being practical meant withdrawing emotional support when I needed it most, because my medical situation might impact your retirement comfort." The silence on the terrace was absolute now, broken only by the distant sound of water lapping at the shore below. Their expressions had transformed from eager anticipation to uncomfortable guilt, though I noted none of them attempted to deny my characterizations. "I invited you here tonight because I wanted to see you all together one last time, in this place that represents what I've built since you calculated I wasn't worth the inconvenience of supporting." My voice remained calm, even as I delivered the words I had rehearsed for weeks. "I wanted you to see exactly what your calculations cost you, not just my presence in your lives going forward, but the knowledge that when it truly mattered, you revealed exactly who you are." Tom was the first to attempt recovery, his sales executive training kicking in. "Becca, we all make mistakes in crisis. I panicked, I admit that. But people deserve second chances. We had 8 good years together." "No, Tom," I interrupted gently. "We had 8 years where I was convenient and accommodating. The moment I became inconvenient, you showed me exactly how much those years actually meant." My father tried next, his tone businessman practical. Now, Rebecca, holding grudges isn't productive. Families sometimes stumble, but blood is blood. We're here now, ready to move forward. You're here now because I have something you want, I corrected him. You weren't here when I was vomiting. From chemotherapy, when I was fighting insurance denials, when I was scared I might die alone. Your presence now isn't reconciliation, it's opportunism. I took a deep breath, feeling an unexpected sense of calm wash over me. I didn't invite you here to berate you or even to make you feel guilty. I invited you here to thank you. That got their attention, confusion replacing defensive postures. Your abandonment was painful beyond description, but it forced me to discover strengths I never knew I possessed. It showed me who truly cared. The colleagues who became friends, the neighbors who became family, the community that embraced me when you stepped away. Most importantly, it freed me from relationships that were fundamentally transactional rather than loving. I gestured to the gardens, the house, the view. None of this would exist if you had stayed. I would never have created WellPath, never have helped thousands of patients navigate their own health crises, never have discovered what I'm truly capable of building on my own. I set my untouched champagne down on the table. So this isn't a reconciliation dinner. It's a farewell dinner. The servers will bring your meals shortly, and you're welcome to enjoy the evening. I've arranged for cars to take you home afterward. But this is the last time we'll meet like this, pretending we're a family when we've proven we're not. With that, I turned and walked back through the gardens toward my home, leaving them stunned on the terrace with their champagne and calculations. I didn't look back to see their reactions. I didn't need to. For the first time since my diagnosis 3 years ago, I felt completely unburdened. Not just from illness, but from the weight of seeking validation from people incapable of providing it. Inside, Maya waited with a small group of the people who had actually supported me through my darkest days. Together, we watched the sunset from my kitchen, sharing pizza and laughter while my former family sat in awkward silence on the terrace, served an elaborate meal they couldn't possibly enjoy. Later, after everyone had gone and the house was quiet, I stood at my bedroom window watching the moonlight on the lake. The evening had unfolded exactly as I had planned, yet the outcome felt different than I had anticipated. Instead of vindication or triumph, what I felt was something simpler and more profound: peace. My family had calculated my worth and found me wanting when I was at my most vulnerable. In making that calculation, they had inadvertently set me free to become more fully myself than I had ever been in their orbit. Their absence had created space for authentic connections, for professional innovation born from personal struggle, for a life built on my own terms rather than theirs. As I turned away from the window, I caught my reflection in the mirror. Stronger, more certain, no longer seeking approval from those who had proven themselves unworthy of my trust. The woman looking back at me had been forged in the crucible of illness and abandonment, emerging not just as a survivor, but as someone who had fundamentally redefined what family meant. Blood might be thicker than water, as my father always claimed, but love, real love, is thicker than both. I had lost a family of obligation, but gained one of choice. And in that transformation had found something I never expected: gratitude for the abandonment that had ultimately set me free. While my world collapsed around me, I discovered something unexpected: the emergence of a different kind of support system. Maya Rodriguez wasn't just helping with rides to the clinic. She was actively researching clinical trials, joining online support groups for Grayson's syndrome, and finding resources I didn't even know existed. One evening, after a particularly grueling treatment that left me shivering on my couch despite the pile of blankets, she arrived with soup and a surprising announcement. "I've contacted the Autoimmune Advocacy Network," she said while arranging medications on my coffee table. "They have emergency assistance grants for people in treatment. The application's already half filled. You just need to sign and provide medical documentation. The grant wasn't large, just enough to cover 1 month's mortgage, but the timing was crucial. My short-term disability payments barely covered the medical expenses insurance refused to pay, leaving nothing for basic living costs. Each day brought new denials from the insurance company, each with convoluted appeal processes that required energy I simply didn't have. Maya wasn't the only unexpected ally who emerged during this time. My elderly neighbor, Mr. Chen, began, leaving homemade bone broth outside my door with notes about its healing properties. Jessica, a receptionist from Greenfield Marketing who I'd barely spoken to during my employment, organized a meal train and delivery service for groceries. Even Dr. Peters went beyond her medical duties, personally calling insurance representatives when certain treatments were denied. These acts of kindness from relative strangers made my family's absence even more conspicuous. My mother's occasional texts became increasingly perfunctory. "Hope you're doing better," without any actual offers of help or even questions about my current condition. When I eventually stopped responding, she didn't even notice enough to follow up. Meanwhile, Tom's attorney continued his aggressive approach to our divorce proceedings. Each legal document read like a business liquidation rather than the dissolution of an 8-year marriage. The townhouse that we had lovingly chosen together, the one with the kitchen island I'd insisted on because we both enjoyed cooking, was now described as asset number 1, its value coldly calculated against remaining mortgage payments. When Patricia, my attorney, delivered the latest settlement offer, her disgust was barely concealed. "He's asking for 70% of the proceeds from the house sale, claiming his income was the primary contribution to the mortgage." She shuffled through the documents with thinly veiled contempt. "He's also requesting reimbursement for the payments he made during the first 3 months of your illness, claiming they were temporary support rather than standard household expenses." I stared at the papers, trying to reconcile this financial predator with the man who had once held me through a miscarriage, promising we would build our family when the time was right. How can he do this? How is this even legal? Patricia's expression softened slightly. "Legally, we can fight most of these claims. Morally?" She shook her head. "Unfortunately, the law doesn't have a provision for don't be a terrible human being." The fight against both my disease and Tom's legal maneuvering consumed every ounce of energy I had. On my better days, I would comb through financial records, medical bills, and insurance policies, trying to create some semblance of organization in the administrative nightmare my life had become. On my worst days, I could barely make it from the bed to the bathroom, the inflammation in my joints creating a pain so intense it brought involuntary tears. 3 months into my treatment, Dr. Peters adjusted my medication protocol after my body developed resistance to the initial drugs. The new regimen hit me even harder, bringing side effects that made the previous ones seem mild by comparison. When my hair began falling out in clumps, I decided to take control of at least that one small aspect of my physical deterioration. Maya arrived with clippers and a bottle of wine, and we made an impromptu ceremony of shaving my head. "To new beginnings," she toasted, raising her glass while I examined my reflection, gaunt, pale, and now completely bald. "Not exactly the fresh start I had in mind," I said, attempting humor through the lump in my throat. Maya set down her wine and met my eyes in the mirror. "You're going to get through this, Becca, and when you do, you'll be unbreakable." I wanted to believe her, but at that moment, I had never felt more fragile. Everything that had defined me, my health, my career, my marriage, my family connections, had been stripped away, leaving me unrecognizable even to myself. The lowest point came during month 4. A severe reaction to one of the medications sent me to the emergency room with difficulty breathing and a rash that covered most of my body. Alone in the hospital room, waiting for test results while steroids and antihistamines dripped into my veins, I found myself wondering if continuing to fight was even worth it. Perhaps Tom and my family had made the rational choice after all. The person I had been was disappearing beneath a mountain of medical complications, financial ruin, and endless suffering. Maybe it was selfish to expect anyone to witness this slow disintegration. The dark thoughts circled as the medications made the edges of my consciousness blur. I must have dozed off because I woke to find Dr. Peters herself checking my IV, though it was well past her normal office hours. "This isn't your department," I mumbled, still groggy from the medications. "I asked to be notified if any of my patients came through the ER," she replied, checking the monitors beside my bed. "How's the breathing now?" "Better," I admitted. "The thoughts are worse than the symptoms at this point." Dr. Peters pulled a chair next to my bed, something I'd never seen her do in her always efficient clinic visits. "Want to tell me about those thoughts?" The unexpected question broke something loose inside me. "I'm just wondering if it's worth it, all this fighting just to stay alive when there's nothing left to live for anyway. Everyone who was supposed to care has already moved on, obviously believing I have no future. Maybe they're right." Dr. Peters was quiet for a moment, her experienced eyes studying my face. "In my 26 years of practice, I've learned one certain thing about autoimmune disorders, Rebecca. They reveal truth, not just in blood tests and biopsies, but in relationships." She adjusted my blanket with an automatic gesture of care. "People show you exactly who they are when you get sick. Some can't handle the reminder of human fragility. Others are afraid of their own inadequacy in the face of suffering. Many simply calculate whether staying is beneficial to them." Her frankness was oddly comforting. No platitudes about how my family surely still loved me, or how Tom was just temporarily overwhelmed. "But here's what those who leave don't understand," she continued. "They miss witnessing one of life's most profound transformations. Patients like you, who go through the crucible of chronic illness, emerge as different people, stronger, more authentic, with an unshakable understanding of what truly matters." She stood, checking my IV one more time. "I've seen patients come through worse than this, Rebecca, and build lives more meaningful than they could have imagined before their illness. Right now, you're in the destruction phase. The rebuilding comes next." Her words stayed with me after she left, creating a small flame of possibility where only ashes had been. The rebuilding comes next. It was the first time anyone had spoken about my future as something other than a medical prognosis. The next morning, Maya arrived with a change of clothes and her laptop. "I've been thinking," she announced without preamble as I changed out of the hospital gown. "You've got about 15 years of marketing expertise, and I've got contacts across 3 industries. We should start a consulting practice together." I stared at her, wondering if the medications were causing hallucinations. "Maya, I can barely stay upright for 4 hours at a time. I'm in the middle of a medical crisis and a divorce. How exactly would I consult on anything?" "Not now," she clarified, pulling up a document on her laptop. "This is future planning. You're going to get better, and when you do, you'll need something to rebuild with. I'm just laying the groundwork." Her absolute certainty that there would be a "when you get better" rather than an "if" hit me with unexpected force. Maya was planning for my future at a time when I couldn't see beyond the next treatment cycle, and she was invested enough to tie her own professional trajectory to mine. It was the first moment since my diagnosis that I allowed myself to truly believe I might have a life on the other side of this ordeal, different from what I had planned, but possibly one worth fighting for. That tiny seed of hope coincided with the first positive medical news in months. The latest blood work showed marginal improvement in my inflammation markers. "It's not remission," Dr. Peters cautioned, "but it's the first sign that your body is responding to the new treatment protocol." That same week, Patricia called with an update on the divorce proceedings. The judge denied Tom's motion to expedite the asset division. She specifically noted your medical situation as requiring additional consideration and time. There was satisfaction in my attorney's voice as she added, she also questioned the timing of his financial moves immediately following your diagnosis. That's not going to play well for him if this goes to trial. These small victories, coupled with Dr. Peters' words about rebuilding, sparked something new in my approach to my situation. Instead of merely trying to survive each day, I began to think strategically about what recovery might look like, not just medically, but financially and emotionally as well. I started by addressing the most immediate threat: housing. The townhouse, once a source of pride and security, had become a financial albatross. The mortgage payments were unsustainable on my limited disability income, and the ongoing battle with Tom over its disposition consumed energy I couldn't spare. After consulting with Patricia, I made the difficult decision to initiate the sale, myself rather than waiting for the court to force the issue. If we take control of the process, she advised, we can try to time it for maximum advantage in the current market. Let's turn his strategy against him. The decision to sell felt simultaneously like defeat and liberation. I would be giving up the home I had loved, but also freeing myself from both the financial burden and the daily reminders of the life that had disintegrated around me. The Portland housing market was experiencing an unexpected upswing, and the townhouse's desirable Rosewood location attracted multiple offers within days of listing. The final sale price exceeded even our optimistic projections, creating a financial cushion that eased my most immediate concerns. Under Patricia's guidance, I placed my portion of the proceeds in a protected account pending the final divorce settlement. This gives us negotiating room, she explained. Tom can continue fighting, but he's no longer holding the threat of homelessness over you. Finding new housing within my limited energy constraints proved challenging. Maya accompanied me to countless apartment viewings, quietly assessing each location for proximity to medical facilities, accessibility features, and overall manageability for someone with unpredictable health. We eventually found a small one-bedroom in Selwood, a quirky neighborhood with tree-lined streets and small businesses within walking distance. The apartment itself was nothing special, but it was clean, had an elevator, and came with a compassionate landlord who, after hearing a simplified version of my situation, offered flexible lease terms. Moving was a logistical nightmare given my physical limitations, but here again, unexpected support emerged. 2 nurses from the infusion center volunteered their husbands and a truck. A client from my former job at Greenfield brought packing, supplies, and spent a weekend helping organize my belongings. Mr. Chen's college-aged grandson coordinated a small crew of students to handle the heavy lifting. I had to be strategic about what to keep, the smaller space necessitating painful decisions about possessions accumulated over years. Each item required calculation, not just of spatial requirements, but of energy expenditure. Could I maintain it? Was it worth the effort to clean, store, or manage? Did it hold memories I wanted to preserve? Or was it better to release it along with the past it represented? The day I moved into the Selwood apartment marked 6 months since my diagnosis. Half a year that had completely transformed every aspect of my existence. As I sat on a folding chair in my new living room, surrounded by boxes I lacked the energy to unpack, the magnitude of those changes washed over me. 6 months ago, I had been a successful marketing executive with a seemingly solid marriage, a close-knit family, a beautiful home, and a healthy body. Now, I was a chronically ill woman, mid-divorce, essentially disowned by her family, living on disability payments in a rented apartment. Yet alongside the losses, I could identify thin threads of new growth. My body was showing the first tentative signs of responding to treatment. The apartment, though modest, was mine alone. A space where I could focus entirely on healing without navigating someone else's disapproval or disappointment. The divorce proceedings, while still contentious, had shifted slightly in my favor thanks to Patricia's strategic approach. And most significantly, I had discovered genuine support from unexpected sources. People who showed up not out of obligation or history, but out of authentic care. As if summoned by this reflection, Maya appeared at my door with dinner and an unexpected guest, a slightly disheveled man in his 50s who introduced himself as Marcus Williams, a financial advisor specializing in medical crises. "Maya mentioned your situation," he explained as he spread papers across my small dining table. "I volunteer with the Autoimmune Advocacy Network, helping patients navigate the financial aspects of chronic illness." Over the next 2 hours, Marcus reviewed my financial documents, insurance policies, and the preliminary divorce settlement with the meticulous attention of someone accustomed to finding hidden opportunities in desperate situations. He identified several insurance coding errors that, when corrected, could result in retroactive coverage for treatments previously denied. He suggested specific language for appealing other denials based on successful precedents. Most valuably, he outlined a sustainable financial strategy for the coming year, balancing medical necessities against basic living expenses. "The system is designed to exhaust you into giving up," he explained, his voice reflecting years of righteous frustration. "Most people don't have the energy to fight while they're also fighting illness. That's by design, not accident." When I tried to pay him for his time, he waved me off. "I do this because my wife died of lupus 15 years ago. The medical system saved her life, then the financial system destroyed it. Now I try to prevent that from happening to others." His generosity of time, expertise, and compassion added another strand to the web of support that was gradually forming around me. These connections weren't based on the traditional bonds of family or marriage, but on something I was beginning to recognize as perhaps more durable: shared understanding of suffering and genuine desire to alleviate it in others. The 7-month mark brought the most significant medical improvement yet. Dr. Peters actually smiled as she reviewed my latest test results. "Your inflammatory markers have decreased by 40%, and the organ involvement is showing signs of reversal. The treatment is working, Rebecca." For the first time, she used the word remission as a realistic goal rather than a distant hope. "It's still a long road," she cautioned, "but we're finally seeing the path forward." The improvement in my physical condition coincided with an important legal development. Tom, apparently tiring of the protracted legal battle, proposed a new settlement through his attorney, one significantly more favorable than his previous offers. He would stop contesting my portion of the townhouse proceeds, withdraw his claims for reimbursement of expenses during the early months of my illness, and agree to a clean break with no ongoing financial entanglements. Patricia was suspicious of the sudden shift. "Something's changed on his end. This is too reasonable compared to his previous positions." We discovered the reason for Tom's newfound spirit of compromise a week later, when Patricia received intelligence through her legal network. Tom had been passed over for an expected promotion at work, with the company citing concerns about judgment and character in their decision. Apparently, his treatment of a seriously ill spouse had raised red flags about his leadership potential, a development that both surprised and satisfied me. There were, it seemed, still some environments where calculated cruelty carried consequences. With my health cautiously improving and the divorce moving toward a less catastrophic conclusion, I began allowing myself to think beyond immediate survival. Maya's idea of a consulting practice no longer seemed like fantasy, though I recognized that a traditional office schedule remained beyond my capabilities. Instead, I began exploring ways to work that accommodated my new limitations. I started by reaching out to former clients with whom I'd had particularly strong relationships, offering limited project-based consultation that I could manage from home during my better hours. The response was encouraging. Several expressed genuine pleasure at hearing from me and readily adapted to my constraints, scheduling video calls around my treatment calendar and accepting that my pace would be necessarily slower than before. These small professional reconnections did more than provide modest supplemental income. They helped restore a sense of identity beyond patient or victim. In these interactions, I was still valued for my expertise, still capable of meaningful contribution despite my altered circumstances. The work itself required adaptation. I developed new systems to accommodate cognitive fluctuations caused by medications, detailed notes, recorded conversations I could review later, and extended deadlines that allowed for inevitable bad days. I learned to be transparent about my limitations while still delivering value, a balance that proved surprisingly acceptable to clients who prioritized my specific skills. 8 months into my journey with Grayson syndrome, I experienced something I had almost forgotten: a good day. Not just an absence of severe symptoms, but an actual day of feeling almost normal, with energy that lasted beyond minimal functioning, with pain reduced to background noise rather than dominating foreground, with mental clarity that persisted for hours instead of appearing in brief windows. I celebrated this milestone by walking to a small cafe 2 blocks from my apartment, sitting at an outdoor table in the spring sunshine, and working on a client project while enjoying the simple pleasure of being in the world rather than adjacent to it. The experience was so ordinary as to be unremarkable for most people, yet it felt like a profound victory, tangible evidence that recovery, however partial, was possible. These good days gradually became more frequent, though they remained unpredictable and often followed by crashes that reminded me recovery wasn't linear. Still, their increasing frequency allowed me to begin rebuilding a life with slightly more dimensions than the illness-centered existence I had been living. I started a small container garden on my apartment balcony, herbs and flowers that required minimal maintenance but provided both beauty and purpose. I joined an online support group for Grayson syndrome patients, finding unexpected comfort in sharing experiences with others who understood the specific challenges of this rare condition. I began attending a gentle yoga class, specifically designed for people with autoimmune disorders, the modified movements helping to maintain mobility without triggering flares. None of these activities resembled the busy, achievement-oriented life I had lived before, but they created texture and meaning within my new limitations. I was learning to measure success differently, not by professional milestones or acquisitions, but by small expansions of possibility within carefully managed parameters. It was during this period of cautious rebuilding that I received the letter from Jonathan Blackwell's office regarding Professor Hamilton's estate. The heavy cream envelope sat unopened on my counter for nearly a day, partly because I rarely received personal mail anymore, and partly because my energy that particular day had been consumed by a telehealth appointment and basic self-care. When I finally opened it the following morning, the content seemed so improbable that I initially suspected a scam or mistake. Professor Hamilton had been an influential figure in my graduate studies, brilliant, demanding, occasionally acerbic. But our relationship, while cordial, had never seemed particularly special. We had maintained loose contact over the years, meeting occasionally for coffee when our schedules aligned, exchanging perfunctory emails about industry developments. I had sent him a brief note after receiving a professional award 3 years earlier, and he had responded with characteristic brevity. Well deserved. Keep pushing boundaries. The idea that this man, known for his professional distance and limited personal attachments, had designated me as the primary beneficiary of a substantial estate defied easy comprehension. Even more surprising was the timing of his decision, the revision of his will specifically coinciding with news of my illness, suggesting a depth of concern I had never suspected. The call to Jonathan Blackwell only confirmed what the letter had stated. Yes, Professor Hamilton had indeed left me his entire estate, valued at approximately $32 million. Yes, this included real estate holdings, investment portfolios, intellectual property rights, and personal property. Yes, he had been of sound mind when making these arrangements. And yes, he had specifically mentioned my medical situation as a motivating factor in his decision. Richard was intensely private about his personal matters, Blackwell explained. his tone suggesting long familiarity with the professor's habits. "But he spoke of you with great admiration. He followed your career quite closely and was deeply concerned when he learned of your health challenges." "But we weren't close," I protested, still struggling to reconcile this generosity with the man I had known. "I mean, I respected him enormously, and I think he thought well of my work, but we saw each other maybe once a year at most." "Richard valued authenticity and integrity above all else," Blackwell replied. "He often said he could count on one hand the former students who truly understood what he was trying to teach beyond the curriculum. You were apparently one of them." The conversation left me dazed, not just from the shock of unexpected wealth, but from the revelation that I had been seen and valued in ways I had never recognized. While my family and husband, people who had professed love and loyalty, had calculated me as a liability at the first sign of vulnerability, this ostensibly distant mentor had quietly recognized something in me worth preserving with every resource at his disposal. The inheritance process itself required patience. There were accounts to establish, legal documents to review, tax implications to consider, and transitions to manage. Blackwell recommended a team of financial advisors who had worked with Professor Hamilton, and I gratefully accepted their guidance, recognizing the magnitude of responsibility that came with such unexpected resources. During the months while these arrangements proceeded, my health continued its tentative improvement. Dr. Peters adjusted my medication protocol again, reducing some of the more aggressive immunosuppressants as my body showed signs of stabilizing. The side effects gradually became more manageable, allowing for increasing periods of normalcy between treatments. The divorce was finalized 9 months after Tom's departure, the terms far more equitable than his initial proposals had suggested. I received no direct communication from him throughout the final proceedings, our last interaction conducted entirely through attorneys. The marriage that had occupied 8 years of my life ended with signatures on documents I never saw in person, a fitting conclusion to a relationship that had ultimately revealed itself as transactional rather than emotional. As my physical condition stabilized and the financial future secured by Professor Hamilton's generosity began to take shape, I found myself at an unexpected crossroads. For nearly a year, my existence had been dominated by immediate concerns: medical treatments, financial survival, basic functioning. Now, with those pressures somewhat alleviated, a different question emerged. What did I actually want my life to be, now that I had the chance to rebuild it deliberately rather than reactively? The question wasn't merely philosophical. The inheritance would provide financial security regardless of my choices, but money alone couldn't create meaning or purpose. The illness had fundamentally altered both my capabilities and my perspectives. The person I had been before, driven by career advancement, social standing, and conventional markers of success, no longer existed in quite the same way. The new version of myself, shaped by suffering and abandonment but also by unexpected kindness and support, wanted different things. I began by considering what had been most conspicuously lacking during my illness, not just material resources, but information, coordination, and advocacy. The American healthcare system, I had discovered, was designed for patients who were both perfectly healthy and financially secure before becoming ill. An obvious contradiction that created unnecessary suffering for those already struggling with disease. The idea for WellPath began as a simple question: what would have made my journey easier? What tools, resources, or systems would have allowed me to focus more on healing and less on administrative battles? The answer, I realized, wasn't a single service or product, but an integrated approach to managing the complex challenges of serious illness. I envisioned a platform that would combine medical information management, insurance navigation, treatment coordination, and community support, AI, comprehensive digital ecosystem designed specifically for patients with complex or chronic conditions. The concept would leverage my marketing background, my newly intimate understanding of patient needs, and the technological resources now available through Professor Hamilton's inheritance. The timing aligned with improvements in my health that allowed for more sustained work periods. While full remission remained elusive, Dr. Peters had found a maintenance protocol that kept symptoms manageable with fewer severe side effects. I still had limitations and unpredictable bad days, but I also had increasing stretches of functional time that could be directed toward meaningful work. Maya was the first person I shared the concept with, sketching preliminary ideas on a notepad during one of our now weekly dinners. Her immediate enthusiasm confirmed my instinct that the idea had potential beyond my personal experience. "This isn't just needed," she said, studying my rough diagrams. "It's necessary. And no one is addressing the patient coordination problem comprehensively." "I'm thinking of using part of the inheritance to fund the development," I explained. "Not as a charity exactly, but as a business with a strong social mission." Maya nodded, already adding notes to my initial outline. "You'd need a strong technical team, medical advisors, patient advocates, regulatory guidance." Her list continued, organizing components with characteristic efficiency. 2 hours and several pages later, the skeleton of WellPath had begun to take form, not just as a vague concept, but as a viable venture with defined goals and implementation strategies. When Maya looked up from her notes, her expression had shifted from professional interest to something more personal. "I want to be part of this," she said simply. "Not just as your friend, but professionally. This matters, and it's exactly the kind of work I've been looking for." Her conviction helped crystallize my own. This wasn't just a project to occupy my newly reconfigured life. It was a meaningful response to my experience, a way to transform personal suffering into systemic improvement for others facing similar challenges. The development of WellPath began modestly, with research and planning conducted from my apartment between medical appointments. I assembled a small team of initial advisors, healthcare professionals, patient advocates, and technology experts to refine the concept and identify potential obstacles. Marcus Williams, the financial advisor who had helped me navigate my medical bills, became an enthusiastic early supporter, offering both his professional expertise and personal insights from his experience with his late wife's illness. As the concept solidified, I made a significant decision that would shape both the business and my personal life moving forward. With my health stabilizing and financial resources now abundant, I could choose to live anywhere. The Selwood apartment had served its purpose during my most vulnerable period, but it was chosen for necessity rather than preference. After considering various options, including returning to my former neighborhood, I was drawn to Lake Oswego, a community near Portland. With excellent healthcare access, natural beauty, and a sense of remove from the places associated with my illness and abandonment, the estate I eventually purchased was perhaps larger than practical necessity dictated, but its features aligned perfectly with my new priorities. A main house with accessibility features for my lower energy days, extensive gardens for the therapeutic, outdoor time that had become important to my well-being, and a separate structure that could be converted into offices for the developing WellPath team. Moving into the Lake Oswego property marked a symbolic as well as practical transition. For the first time since my diagnosis, I was making a choice based on desire rather than limitation, creating a space that reflected possibility rather than constraint. The home wasn't a return to my previous life, but rather the establishment of something entirely new, a physical manifestation of the rebuilding Dr. Peters had once promised would follow destruction. From this new base, the development of WellPath accelerated. I established a formal company structure, secured necessary patents and intellectual property protections, and began recruiting a dedicated team to transform the concept into reality. Maya became Chief Operating Officer, bringing her organizational skills and growing network of healthcare contacts to the venture. We hired developers, medical consultants, patient experience designers, and regulatory experts, building a diverse team unified by commitment to improving healthcare navigation for vulnerable patients. The work was demanding but profoundly satisfying. Each feature we developed addressed specific challenges I had encountered during my illness, from medication interaction tracking to appointment coordination, from insurance appeal templates to symptom journals that could identify patterns over time. We integrated secure communication channels between care providers, created accessible explanations of complex medical terminology, and built community spaces for patients with similar conditions to share experiences and resources. 18 months after my diagnosis, a period that had contained more transformation than the previous decade of my life, WellPath launched its initial platform. The response exceeded even our optimistic projections, with medical centers, patient advocacy groups, and individual users quickly recognizing its value in addressing long-standing gaps in care coordination. Healthcare publications featured articles about our innovative approach, and investment offers began arriving from entities eager to participate in what was clearly addressing a significant market need. This professional success coincided with continued improvement in my health. While Grayson syndrome would remain a lifelong condition requiring monitoring and maintenance treatment, Dr. Peters had successfully guided me to what she cautiously termed managed remission, a state where symptoms were controlled enough to allow for relatively normal functioning most days, with only occasional flares requiring intervention. "You've come through the worst of it," she told me during an appointment marking the 2-year anniversary of my diagnosis. "Most patients with your initial presentation don't achieve this level of improvement. Your persistence with the treatment protocol despite the side effects has paid off." The physical recovery, though still incomplete, allowed me to appreciate the profound ways my illness had restructured my values and perspectives. I no longer measured success by external validation or conventional achievements, but by alignment with authentic purpose. Relationships had acquired a different quality as well, deeper, more carefully chosen, based on demonstrated character rather than circumstance or obligation. It was against this backdrop of growing stability and clarity that my family began their calculated return to my life. The first contact came from my brother Daniel, a text message so casual it might have been sent to someone he'd spoken with the previous week rather than ignored for nearly 2 years. "Saw your company featured in Portland Business Monthly. Impressive work. We should catch up." No acknowledgement of his absence during my illness, no recognition of what I had endured without his support, just a strategically neutral overture that established contact without admitting wrongdoing. The timing, coinciding exactly with public recognition of my professional success, revealed the calculation behind the seemingly casual reconnection. My sister Sarah's approach was equally transparent. An email invitation to her son's first birthday party, accompanied by a breezy update about her life and family milestones I had missed through her deliberate exclusion. The postscript, "I'd love to hear more about this exciting business venture," made clear her renewed interest coincided precisely with my changed circumstances. My parents were perhaps the most direct in their opportunism. My father called one evening, his voice attempting a warmth that had been notably absent when I had needed actual support. "Your mother and I have been thinking it's time to put the past behind us," he announced, as if our estrangement had been a mutual decision. Rather than their abandonment, families should stick together, especially in times of success. The phrase was revealing in its specificity, not "in times of need" or "in times of crisis," which were already past, but "in times of success," which had only recently emerged, and offered potential benefit to them. Tom was the last to reappear, his approach calculated to appear coincidental. He sent a LinkedIn connection request followed by a message mentioning he'd happened to see the article about WellPath and was genuinely happy about my improved health and professional achievements. The message concluded with a suggestion that we meet for coffee to catch up as friends. Each of these overtures produced a complex emotional response: anger at their transparent opportunism, vindication that they now sought what they had previously discarded, and a surprising emptiness, where I had once expected satisfaction might be. Their recognition of my value, now that it was externally validated, didn't heal the wound of their calculation that I was disposable when vulnerable. I responded to these initial contacts with polite neutrality, neither rejecting nor embracing the attempted reconnections. The responses clearly encouraged them, as each followed up with increasingly familiar communications, speaking of family bonds and shared history as if the past 2 years had been a minor misunderstanding rather than a fundamental revelation of character. It was during a peaceful evening in my garden, watching the sunset reflect on the lake below my property, that the idea for the reconciliation dinner first occurred to me. Not as an actual attempt at re-establishing family connections, but as a necessary closing of a chapter that remained unresolved despite all the progress I had made. There were things that needed to be said, not for their benefit, but for my own complete healing, truths that deserved explicit articulation rather than silent acknowledgement. The decision made, I proceeded with careful intention. The invitations were designed to appeal to their social aspirations. Heavy cream cardstock with gold lettering, formal language suggesting an important occasion, specific instructions regarding attire. The family reconciliation dinner framing would encourage their most optimistic interpretations, allowing them to project their own desires onto the event. I selected the date carefully, allowing sufficient time for anticipation to build while ensuring my health would be stable enough to handle the emotional demands of the evening. The menu was planned with similar deliberation, elegant, but not overly extravagant, suggesting prosperity without ostentation. Every detail, from the garden lighting to the table settings, was arranged to create an atmosphere of tasteful success, the perfect setting for the family reunion they clearly envisioned. Their responses arrived quickly, all affirmative, all expressing variations on delight at the prospect of reuniting our close-knit family. Reading between the lines of their enthusiastic acceptances, I could almost see the calculations happening. The networking opportunities, the financial advantages of renewed ties with a successful relative, the social validation of association with a now prominent business founder. As the date approached, I found myself surprisingly calm. The confrontation I had once imagined with anger and vindictiveness had transformed in my mind to something more measured, a necessary truth-telling that would free me from the last lingering attachments to people who had revealed their conditional nature. This wasn't about punishing them for their calculations, but about honoring my own worth by acknowledging what had occurred without minimization or false reconciliation. The evening of the dinner arrived with perfect weather, clear skies, mild temperature, a gentle breeze carrying the scent of the roses I had planted during my first spring at the Lake Oswego property. Standing at the entrance to my home, watching as they arrived one by one in their carefully selected attire, I felt a strange sense of completeness, as if a circle begun with my diagnosis was finally closing, allowing me to step fully into whatever came next. They arrived one after another, each entrance carefully timed as if coordinated to maximize their individual impact. Daniel and his wife Jennifer pulled up in a new luxury SUV, the badge on the front suggesting a recent upgrade in their lifestyle despite the financial struggles he had cited when abandoning me to my illness. They paused at the base of the driveway, taking in the estate with poorly concealed assessment before plastering on matching smiles and approaching with outstretched arms. "Becca!" Daniel's voice boomed across the garden path. "Look at you and look at this place. Absolutely incredible." I accepted his embrace with practiced calm, noting how his hand patted my back with the same rhythm he used when closing business deals. Jennifer hung back slightly, her enthusiasm more measured as she air-kissed my cheek. "You look so much better," she offered, her tone suggesting this was the highest compliment imaginable. Sarah and her husband Michael arrived next, their late model, Seddon pulling in just as Daniel and Jennifer were exclaiming over the lakeside view. Sarah had clearly spent considerable time on her appearance, her outfit expensive and clearly new. She clutched her designer handbag like a shield as she approached, her smile tight with an emotion I couldn't quite identify. "This is just gorgeous," she gushed, gesturing vaguely toward the house and gardens. "I knew you were doing well, but I had no idea." The trailing sentence contained the question she wasn't quite brave enough to ask directly. How exactly had I achieved this level of prosperity after the financial devastation they had all assumed would follow my illness and divorce? The curiosity radiated from her like heat from pavement on a summer day. My parents arrived together, my father driving with the careful precision he always adopted when visiting properties he intended to evaluate. They emerged from their car with the practiced dignity of people who considered themselves the most important arrivals of any gathering. My mother had styled her hair in the same upswept arrangement she wore to charity galas, and my father had selected his board meeting tie. Subtle signals of the significance they placed on this reconciliation. "Rebecca," my mother said, pulling me into a perfumed embrace that was more performance than affection. "We've missed you terribly." My father nodded in solemn agreement, his hand resting heavily on my shoulder. "The family hasn't been the same without you." The statement might have been moving if it hadn't been delivered with the same intonation he used for business platitudes at company events. Tom arrived last, perfectly timed to make a separate entrance rather than risk being grouped with the family he had once been part of. He had chosen understated elegance in his attire, expensive but not flashy, suggesting successful recovery from whatever financial setbacks my illness might have caused him. The bouquet of lilies he carried was an obvious peace offering, though he had managed to select the one flower I had repeatedly mentioned disliking throughout our marriage. "Becca," he said, his voice pitched to convey both intimacy and contrition. "You look wonderful, truly wonderful." I accepted the flowers with a neutral smile. "Thank you, Tom. Please, join the others on the terrace. We'll be serving drinks shortly." As I led my assembled former support system through the gardens to the terrace overlooking the lake, I observed their reactions with detached curiosity. Their expressions oscillated between admiration of the property and calculation of its value, between pleasure at being included in this apparent reconciliation and assessment of what advantages it might offer them. The terrace had been set with elegant precision, fine linens, crystal glassware, silver serving pieces that caught the golden light of early evening. A staff member I had hired for the evening poured champagne into flutes as my guests arranged, themselves with the careful positioning of people in a formal photograph. "A toast," my father proposed once everyone held a glass, assuming the patriarch role as if it were his natural right. "To family coming together again, and to Rebecca's incredible success." They raised their glasses, their smiles revealing more teeth than joy as they looked to me for the reciprocal warmth that would officially mark the restoration of our family bonds. Instead, I simply held my flute without drinking, my silence creating the first ripple of unease in their carefully constructed narrative. "Before we continue," I said, my voice steady in the evening air, "I want to thank you all for coming tonight. It's been a remarkable 3 years since my diagnosis, a journey that transformed not just my health, but my understanding of what truly matters in life." They nodded encouragingly, mistaking my preamble for the beginning of a reconciliation speech. My mother dabbed at her eye preemptively, rehearsing emotion she hadn't shown when I'd actually needed her compassion. 3 years ago, when Dr. Peters told me I had Grayson syndrome, my world changed in an instant. I learned that my body was attacking itself, that the treatment would be grueling, and that my future was suddenly uncertain. I paused, looking at each of them in turn. But the most painful lesson came in the weeks that followed, when I learned exactly how conditional my family's love actually was. The atmosphere shifted perceptibly, smiles faltering as they realized this wasn't proceeding according to their script. Tom set his champagne down with exaggerated care, his eyes darting toward potential exits as if mapping escape routes. "Tom," I said, turning to my ex-husband, who froze like prey sensing a predator. You left 3 days after my diagnosis, emptied our joint accounts, and then had your attorney argue that my illness constituted a form of financial fraud against you. I shifted my gaze to my brother. Daniel, you suggested I sell my home, while I was still reeling from my diagnosis and Tom's departure, and then proposed I loan the proceeds to the family business. Next, my sister. Sarah, you excluded me from family events because my illness was too depressing and might shift attention from your special moments. Finally, my parents. And Mom and Dad, you decided that being practical meant withdrawing. Emotional support when I needed it most, because my medical situation might impact your retirement comfort. The silence on the terrace was absolute now, broken only by the distant sound of water lapping at the shore below. Their expressions had transformed from eager anticipation to uncomfortable guilt, though I noted none of them attempted to deny my characterizations. I invited you here tonight because I wanted to see you all together one last time, in this place that represents what I've built since you calculated I wasn't worth the inconvenience of supporting. My voice remained calm, even as I delivered the words I had rehearsed for weeks. I wanted you to see exactly what your calculations cost you, not just my presence in your lives going forward, but the knowledge that when it truly mattered, you revealed exactly who you are. Tom was the first to attempt recovery, his sales executive training kicking in. Becca, we all make mistakes in crisis. I panicked, I admit that. But people deserve second chances. We had 8 good years together. No, Tom, I interrupted gently. We had 8 years where I was convenient and accommodating. The moment I became inconvenient, you showed me exactly how much those years actually meant. My father tried next, his tone businessman practical. Now, Rebecca, holding grudges isn't productive. Families sometimes stumble, but blood is blood. We're here, now, ready to move forward. You're here now because I have something you want, I corrected him. You weren't here when I was vomiting from chemotherapy, when I was fighting insurance denials, when I was scared I might die alone. Your presence now isn't reconciliation, it's opportunism. My mother's face tightened with the same expression she used when social gatherings weren't proceeding according to her plans. Darling, this seems unnecessarily dramatic. We always loved you. We just weren't equipped to handle such a difficult situation. Not everyone can be a caretaker. I never asked you to be caretakers, I replied, the old hurt briefly resurfacing before settling back into calm clarity. I asked you to be parents, to call occasionally, to perhaps bring a meal or check if I needed anything. The bare minimum of what family typically provides. Sarah shifted uncomfortably, her designer bag now clutched against her chest like armor. It wasn't personal, Becca. The timing was just terrible with the pregnancy and everything. It was entirely personal, Sarah. When you're excluded specifically because of a medical condition you didn't choose and can't control, that's the definition of personal. Daniel, always looking for negotiating angles, leaned forward with his most reasonable expression. Look, we all regret how things played out. Obviously, we made poor choices in a difficult situation, but the fact that we're all here now shows our commitment to making things right. Surely that counts for something? The fact that you're all here now shows your commitment to being associated with me now that I'm successful, I corrected him. If I were still sick, still struggling financially, still in need of actual support, would you be sitting on this terrace? Would you have even returned my calls? His silence provided the only honest response of the evening. I took a deep breath, feeling an unexpected sense of calm wash over me. I didn't invite you here to berate you or even to make you feel guilty. I invited you here to thank you. That got their attention, confusion replacing defensive postures. Your abandonment was painful beyond description, but it forced me to discover strengths I never knew I possessed. It showed me who truly cared. The colleagues who became friends, the neighbors who became family, the community that embraced me when you stepped away. Most importantly, it freed me from relationships that were fundamentally transactional rather than loving. I gestured to the gardens, the house, the view. None of this would exist if you had stayed. I would never have created WellPath, never. Have helped thousands of patients navigate their own health crises, never have discovered what I'm truly capable of building on my own. I set my untouched champagne down on the table. So this isn't a reconciliation dinner, it's a farewell dinner. The servers will bring your meals shortly, and you're welcome to enjoy the evening. I've arranged for cars to take you home afterward. But this is the last time we'll meet like this, pretending we're a family when we've proven we're not. With a sweet. That I turned and walked back through the gardens toward my home, leaving them stunned on the terrace with their champagne and calculations. I didn't look back to see their reactions. I didn't need to. For the first time since my diagnosis 3 years ago, I felt completely unburdened. Not just from illness, but from the weight of seeking validation from people incapable of providing it. Inside, Maya waited with a small group of the people who had actually supported me through my darkest days. Together, we watched the sunset from my kitchen, sharing pizza and laughter while my former family sat in awkward silence on the terrace, served an elaborate meal they couldn't possibly enjoy. The evening progressed exactly as I had anticipated. From the kitchen windows, we could see them on the terrace, their body language revealing their discomfort. They ate mechanically, conversation visibly strained. My father attempted to take charge several times, his gestures suggesting he was proposing toasts or initiating discussions that quickly faltered. My mother maintained her social facade with increasing effort, her perfect posture gradually revealing the tension it concealed. Tom checked his watch repeatedly, clearly calculating the earliest polite moment to depart. Sarah and Daniel's spouses showed the distinct discomfort of people who had heard one version of a family story only to discover a radically different reality. Only the hired staff moved with ease, professionally serving each course with the pleasant neutrality of people witnessing a drama that wasn't theirs to engage with. "Are you okay?" Maya asked, refilling my glass with sparkling water. "That couldn't have been easy." "Strangely, it was," I replied, surprised by the truth of it. "Easier than I expected. They have no power over me anymore. Not my happiness, not my sense of worth, not even my anger. They're just people who made their choices, and now I've made mine." Marcus, who had become both a financial advisor and friend during my recovery, raised his glass. "To choices that honor our own worth." The small group gathered in my kitchen, Maya and her husband Marcus, Dr. Peters, who had come straight from the hospital still wearing scrubs under her blazer, my neighbor Mrs. Abernathy, who had checked on me daily during my worst days, raised their glasses in response. This mismatched collection of people bound by genuine care rather than obligation had become more family to me than those sharing my DNA ever had. As predicted, my former family began departing shortly after dessert was served. From the kitchen window, we watched them leave in awkward clusters. My parents first, my father's stride purposeful as if late for an important meeting. Sarah and Michael next, her gestures suggesting an excuse about relieving their babysitter. Daniel and Jennifer lingering the longest, perhaps hoping for a private opportunity to negotiate some ongoing connection to my success. Tom left alone, pausing at the garden entrance to look back at the house with an expression I couldn't quite decipher. Regret, perhaps, or simple calculation of opportunities lost. None of them attempted to find me before leaving. The boundaries I had established had been too clear, too firmly delivered to invite further discussion that evening. I had no doubt there would be attempts at contact in the coming days. Messages crafted to test whether my resolve might soften, whether there might be some compromise that would allow them access without accountability. I already knew I wouldn't respond. Later, after everyone had gone and the house was quiet, I stood at my bedroom window watching the moonlight on the lake. The evening had unfolded exactly as I had planned, yet the outcome felt different than I had anticipated. Instead of vindication or triumph, what I felt was something simpler and more profound: peace. My family had calculated my worth and found me wanting when I was at my most vulnerable. In making that calculation, they had inadvertently set me free to become more fully myself than I had ever been in their orbit. Their absence had created space for authentic connections, for professional innovation born from personal struggle, for a life built on my own terms rather than theirs. As I turned away from the window, I caught my reflection in the mirror, stronger, more certain, no longer seeking approval from those who had proven themselves unworthy of my trust. The woman looking back at me had been forged in the crucible of illness and abandonment, emerging not just as a survivor, but as someone who had fundamentally redefined what family meant. Blood might be thicker than water, as my father always claimed, but love, real love, is thicker than both. I had lost a family of obligation but gained one of choice, and in that transformation had found something I never expected: gratitude for the abandonment that had ultimately set me free. The weeks following the reconciliation dinner brought predictable attempts at contact. My father called 3 times before finally leaving a message expressing disappointment in my unprofessional behavior at what should have been a straightforward family reunion. The corporate language revealed more than he intended about how he conceptualized family relationships as business arrangements to be managed rather than emotional bonds to be nurtured. My mother took a different approach, sending a handwritten letter on her personal stationery. The carefully composed message acknowledged that they perhaps should have been more present during my illness, but suggested my reaction was disproportionate to the situation and potentially influenced by medication side effects. She concluded by expressing hope that I would reconsider once emotions had settled, positioning my boundary setting as a temporary emotional outburst rather than a considered decision. Daniel attempted the most persistent campaign, sending emails with business propositions thinly disguised as olive branches. "I respect your feelings," one message began before pivoting to, "but I think we could partner effectively on expanding WellPath's regional presence." Another suggested that family disagreements shouldn't interfere with mutually beneficial business opportunities, revealing his continued inability to distinguish between transactional and emotional relationships. Sarah's approach was the most passive-aggressive, posting social media updates about family healing and forgiveness, clearly designed to position herself as the reasonable party extending grace to an unreasonable relative. She tagged mutual acquaintances in these posts, effectively recruiting an audience for her performance of reconciliation, without addressing the actual behavior that had necessitated boundaries in the first place. Tom maintained complete silence, the only response that suggested any genuine reflection on what had transpired. I found myself respecting his decision not to pursue further contact, though I suspected it stemmed more from practical assessment of the situation's hopelessness than from genuine remorse or growth. I responded to none of these overtures. The clarity I had achieved on the night of the dinner only strengthened in the following weeks. These were not people capable of the authentic connection I now recognized as essential to my well-being. Their tactics, guilt, minimization, financial incentives, social pressure, were simply more sophisticated versions of the conditional engagement they had always offered. Meanwhile, life continued its forward momentum. WellPath secured a major partnership with a national healthcare system, dramatically expanding our reach to vulnerable patients. Our team grew to over 50 employees, necessitating the conversion of my guest house into expanded office space and the leasing of additional facilities in downtown Portland. Industry recognition accumulated, with healthcare publications featuring our innovative approach to patient advocacy and coordination. My health maintained its stable trajectory, with Dr. Peters gradually reducing my medication protocol to a maintenance regimen that produced minimal side effects. "You'll always need monitoring," she cautioned during a follow-up appointment, but we're approaching something close to normal life expectancy and quality with your current status. The physical energy that returned with improved health allowed me to expand beyond work, rediscovering pleasures that illness had temporarily suspended. I joined a community garden project in an underserved Portland neighborhood, applying my newfound horticultural interest to creating green spaces where residents could grow food and gather. I began taking sailing lessons on the lake, the physical and mental demands of navigating wind and water, providing a meditative focus that complemented my otherwise cerebral work. Most significantly, I started speaking publicly about my experience, not just the medical journey with a rare autoimmune condition, but the broader social and emotional dimensions of serious illness. Healthcare conferences, patient advocacy, groups, and medical schools invited me to share insights about the gaps in support systems and the innovations needed to address them. These presentations invariably included the personal narrative that had inspired WellPath, including the abandonment by my family and husband. I delivered these portions without bitterness or accusation, presenting them simply as factual elements of a journey that had ultimately led to positive transformation. The vulnerability of these disclosures created profound connections with audiences, particularly with other patients who had experienced similar rejection during health crises. Following one such presentation at a medical humanities conference, a distinguished older physician approached me with tears in his eyes. 30 years in practice, he said, taking my hand in both of his, and I've never fully understood what happens to patients outside my exam room until today. You've changed how I'll practice medicine from this point forward. These moments of impact, the knowledge that my painful experience was being transformed into something that might prevent or alleviate suffering for others, provided a sense of purpose that transcended the personal vindication I had once sought. The life that had emerged from the wreckage of illness and abandonment wasn't just functional or successful by conventional metrics, it was meaningful in ways I couldn't have imagined before my diagnosis. 3 years and 2 months after Dr. Peters had delivered the news that fundamentally altered my life trajectory, I received the formal medical declaration I had once believed impossible: complete remission. The appointment had been routine, one of the regular monitoring visits that had become simply another calendar item rather than the emotional focal points they had once been. "Your labs are perfect," Dr. Peters announced, genuine pleasure warming, her typically professional demeanor. "And the advanced imaging shows no active disease process. This is what we call complete remission. Not just management, but actual absence of disease activity." I stared at her, momentarily unable to process the information. "Are you saying I'm cured?" She smiled, tempering the moment with medical precision. "With autoimmune conditions, we avoid the term cured. The underlying genetic and immunological factors are still present, and vigilance is always necessary. But yes, for all practical purposes, your body has returned to normal functioning without active disease process." The news was simultaneously momentous and anticlimactic. The Rebecca who had received her diagnosis 3 years earlier would have considered this moment the ultimate victory, the return to normal she had desperately craved. The Rebecca sitting in Dr. Peters' office now recognized it as simply another milestone in a continuing journey, significant certainly, but not defining. "So what happens now?" I asked, more curious than anxious about the answer. "We continue monitoring, though less frequently. We maintain a low-dose preventative medication protocol. You continue living your life with awareness but not fear." She closed my file with a gesture that somehow conveyed completion. "You've done the hardest part already, building a meaningful life within the constraints of chronic illness. Now you get to discover what that life looks like with fewer constraints." As I left the medical center that day, I found myself reflecting on the extraordinary circular journey of the past 3 years. I had begun as a successful professional with a seemingly solid marriage and family connections, moved through devastating illness and abandonment to profound isolation, then emerged into a completely reconfigured life with different values, relationships, and purpose. The path had not been linear, not a journey from illness to health, from abandonment to reconciliation, from loss to recovery, but rather a spiral that returned me to certain starting points with entirely new perspectives. I was professionally successful again, but with work that served others rather than simply advancing my own career. I had a home again, but one that reflected authentic preferences rather than social expectations. I had health again, but with a profound appreciation for its fragility and preciousness that I had previously lacked. Most significantly, I had relationships again, but with people who had proven their capacity for unconditional support rather than those whose love was contingent on convenience. This new constellation of connections, Maya and her family, Marcus, Dr. Peters, colleagues from WellPath, neighbors in Lake Oswego, fellow patients who had become friends, formed a community more genuine than the biological and legal ties I had once prioritized. That evening, I hosted an impromptu gathering to share the news of my remission. Unlike the formal reconciliation dinner I had orchestrated for my former family, this celebration was casually assembled. Phone calls to the people who had actually accompanied me through the medical journey, pizza ordered from a local restaurant, music playing through speakers that carried out to the lakeside garden where we gathered as the sun set. To remission, Maya toasted, raising her glass as the group assembled in a loose circle on the lawn, and to revelations, Marcus added, his expression reflecting the wisdom gained through his own experiences with his late wife's illness. Sometimes it takes a medical crisis to reveal what and who truly matters. Dr. Peters, looking younger, in casual clothes than in her clinical attire, smiled with a mixture of professional satisfaction and personal connection. To patients who become teachers, she offered, Rebecca, your case has changed how I practice medicine in ways that will benefit patients I haven't even met yet. The warmth of these genuine connections, forged through authentic care rather than obligation or advantage, enveloped me like an embrace. This was what family truly meant, I realized. Not shared genetics or legal documentation, but people who showed up consistently, who valued you at your most vulnerable, who celebrated your victories and supported you through defeats without calculation of personal benefit. As darkness fell and lanterns illuminated the garden, I found myself at the edge of the gathering, watching as people who had entered my life through different paths interacted with the easy comfort of those connected by something deeper than circumstance. Maya's husband was deep in conversation with Marcus about sailing techniques. Dr. Peters was laughing with my neighbor, Mrs. Abernathy, about a shared fondness for mystery novels. Two members of my WellPath team were exchanging contact information with a fellow patient from my support group who had professional experience they valued. These organic connections, forming and strengthening beyond my direct involvement, represented something I had never experienced in my biological family. Relationships that existed for their own sake, rather than as part of a predetermined structure of obligation. This was a community building itself, each connection based on genuine affinity rather than assigned roles. Later, after the celebration had concluded and the house was quiet again, I sat alone on the terrace where I had confronted my family months earlier. The night was clear, stars reflected in the still surface of the lake below. In the peaceful darkness, I allowed myself to fully acknowledge what the medical declaration of remission meant beyond its clinical significance. I had survived, not just the autoimmune disorder that had threatened my physical existence, but the emotional devastation of discovering conditional love where I had expected unconditioned support. I had rebuilt, not just my health through medical intervention, but my entire life through conscious choices about what and who deserved space within it. I had transformed, not just from patient back to healthy person, but from someone who measured worth through others' assessment to someone who recognized her intrinsic value regardless of external validation. The journey had been unimaginably painful at times, the losses profound, the challenges seemingly insurmountable. Yet sitting in the quiet aftermath of celebration, I felt something I had never expected to find through such difficulty: gratitude. Not gratitude for the illness itself. I would never romanticize the physical suffering, the medical trauma, the financial devastation that accompanied Grayson's syndrome. But gratitude for the clarity it had ultimately provided, for the authentic connections it had facilitated, for the person I had become through surviving it. My family's abandonment, intended to protect their convenience and financial stability, had ultimately given me the greatest gift possible: freedom from relationships that diminished rather than enhanced my humanity. In calculating that I was a liability rather than an asset, they had inadvertently liberated me to discover my true value, not as it appeared on balance sheets or social ledgers, but as it existed inherently in my capacity for resilience, growth, and genuine connection. As I rose to go inside, I caught sight of my reflection in the glass doors, not the successful executive I had been before diagnosis, not the abandoned patient I had become after, but someone new entirely. Someone who had walked through fire and emerged not just intact, but illuminated, carrying light where there had once been only fear and obligation. The woman in the reflection smiled back at me, her expression peaceful in the knowledge that complete remission wasn't just a medical status, but a spiritual condition. Release from the disease of conditional worth that had infected my life long before Grayson's syndrome had entered my vocabulary. I had been abandoned, yes, but in that abandonment, I had found myself. And that, I now understood, was the most profound healing of all. 4 months after the dinner, life settled into a new rhythm. Their contact attempts gradually faded away. My father's calls ceased after the third unanswered message. My mother's correspondence dwindled to occasional holiday cards with carefully neutral sentiments. Daniel's business proposals disappeared as he found other networking opportunities, and Sarah's passive-aggressive social media campaign shifted to new targets as it failed to provoke a response from me. Only Tom maintained a peripheral presence, though not through direct contact. Mutual acquaintances would occasionally mention spotting him: a promotion at work, a girlfriend significantly younger than me, the apartment upgrade that typically accompanied his 5-year personal milestone cycles. These updates arrived with decreasing frequency and emotional impact, each one validating the boundaries I had established. WellPath continued its expansion, evolving from a startup to an established healthcare innovation company. Our user base grew to over 200,000 patients with various chronic conditions, and healthcare systems increasingly integrated our platform into their standard protocols. What began as my personal response to navigational challenges during illness had transformed into a genuine solution for patients facing similar struggles nationwide. The company's growth required infrastructure beyond what my Lake Oswego property could accommodate. We leased office space in downtown Portland, a light-filled building with accessibility features and views of the Willamette River. Our staff expanded to nearly 70 employees, all unified by a commitment to improving care coordination for vulnerable populations. My role evolved as well, shifting from hands-on management to broader strategic leadership. Maya proved herself an exceptional chief operating officer, handling internal operations with an efficiency that freed me to focus on innovation, partnerships, and advocacy. We developed a balanced professional dynamic, her organizational strengths complementing my visionary tendencies in ways that benefited the organization as a whole. The most fulfilling aspect of this professional evolution was working directly with patients navigating challenges similar to those I had faced. We established a patient advisory council that provided ongoing insight into real-world healthcare obstacles, ensuring our platform remained responsive to actual needs rather than theoretical problems. These monthly meetings became highlights in my schedule, each session revealing new opportunities for meaningful improvement in chronically ill patients' lives. During one such meeting, I met Eliza Chen, a 30-year-old teacher recently diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. Her articulate description of information overload during early diagnosis resonated deeply with my own experience. After the formal meeting concluded, she lingered, clearly wanting to continue our conversation. "This might sound strange," she said hesitantly, "but when I was first diagnosed, someone shared an article about your story. It became a kind of lifeline for me, knowing someone had walked this path and not just survived, but created something meaningful from it." Her vulnerability touched me deeply. That doesn't sound strange at all. Connection is crucial when you're facing something this overwhelming. "The part that helped most," she continued, "was your honesty about how people respond to chronic illness, how some disappear while others show up in unexpected ways. It prepared me for some difficult conversations with my own family." Her comment crystallized a realization that had been forming over recent months. The public aspects of my story, shared through interviews and conference presentations, were serving purposes beyond business development. They were providing a framework for other patients to navigate the social dimensions of serious illness, potentially sparing them some of the isolation I had experienced. This conversation catalyzed a new project, a comprehensive guide for newly diagnosed patients addressing not just medical management but emotional and relational aspects of chronic illness. The guide would combine expert input with first-person narratives, creating a resource I had desperately needed during my early diagnosis period. The development process connected me with healthcare providers, patient advocates, psychologists, and fellow patients across the country. These collaborations expanded my professional network while deepening my understanding of how varied the chronic illness experience could be across different conditions, socioeconomic circumstances, and support systems. Dr. Peters remained a valued advisor, our relationship evolving from doctor-patient to genuine professional collaboration. She joined WellPath's Medical Advisory Board, providing clinical guidance while using insights from our patient data to improve her own practice protocols. During one advisory meeting, she pulled me aside with characteristic directness. "You've created something remarkable here," she said, gesturing toward the bustling office. "But I'm professionally obligated to ask, are you maintaining your own health boundaries while building all this?" The question was both caring and necessary. The intensity of WellPath's growth combined with my personal stake in its mission created natural tendencies toward overextension. "I've learned that lesson thoroughly," I assured her. "The executive team has strict instructions to intervene if I schedule back-to-back meetings without breaks. Maya has been known to physically remove my laptop if I'm working past 7. And I haven't missed a single follow-up appointment." Dr. Peters smiled, satisfied with my response. "Good, because the patients who need what you've built also need you to model sustainable engagement with chronic illness, including the recognition that even in remission, energy management remains essential." Outside of professional development, my personal life expanded in unexpected ways. The garden at my Lake Oswego property evolved from therapeutic project to genuine passion, with dedicated areas for vegetables, cutting flowers, and native habitat plants. Weekend mornings among the plants provided a meditative counterbalance to weekday strategic thinking. Physical activity returned to my routine as well, modified to accommodate my body's new parameters. Gentle yoga, 3 mornings weekly maintained. Joint flexibility affected by prior inflammation. Swimming in the lake during summer months built cardiovascular capacity without stressing recovering systems. These weren't the high-intensity workouts of my pre-illness life, but rather mindful movement that honored my body's journey through disease and healing. Social connections continued developing organically, no longer constrained by illness limitations or family expectations. I began hosting monthly dinner gatherings that combined WellPath colleagues, healthcare professionals, neighbors, and fellow patient advocates, creating community integrated across previously separate spheres of my life. These evenings, characterized by lively discussion and genuine exchange, reinforced the value of relationships built on shared purpose rather than obligation. The first significant disruption to this carefully constructed equilibrium arrived, unexpectedly, a formal letter from Theodore Wilson, Tom's attorney during our divorce proceedings. The heavy envelope bearing his firm's embossed letterhead created an immediate visceral response, a tightening in my chest, a return of the hypervigilance that had characterized those vulnerable months when legal threats had arrived regularly among medical bills. I set the envelope aside unopened, completing my workday before returning to it that evening. When I finally opened it after dinner, the contents proved more benign than my apprehensions had suggested. The letter was brief and formally polite, notifying me that Tom was contesting a technical aspect of our property division related to his pension valuation. The issue was minor, involving a calculation discrepancy that would affect final distribution by less than $5,000. The transparently thin justification for contact confirmed my suspicions. This wasn't about pension valuation, a matter that could have been handled entirely through attorneys without direct notification, but rather, Tom's attempt to reestablish some form of connection. The approach through legal channels rather than personal outreach suggested calculation rather than genuine interest in reconciliation. I forwarded the letter to Patricia, my attorney, with a brief note indicating I had no interest in direct engagement. Her response arrived promptly the next morning. This is procedural minutiae that his attorney could have handled with a standard filing. I'll respond formally and ensure no direct contact is necessary. 2 weeks later, I received a handwritten note from Tom, the first direct, non-legal communication since the dinner. The envelope contained no return address, though the handwriting was immediately recognizable. Inside was a single card with a brief message. "Thank you for handling the pension matter graciously. I appreciate your consideration more than you know. Wishing you continued success and good health. Tom." The note revealed more through its subtext than its explicit content. The carefully neutral tone, combined with personal delivery rather than attorney communication, suggested strategic positioning, establishing contact while maintaining plausible deniability about intentions. The mention of my health served as a reminder of our shared experience during early diagnosis, an implicit claim to connection through that history. I disposed of the note without response, recognizing it as the first move in what might become repeated attempts at contact. The pattern was familiar: testing small openings, gauging response, gradually expanding attempts if not firmly rebuffed. The strategy confirmed that nothing fundamental had changed in Tom's approach to relationships. Still calculated, still opportunistic, still centered on his interests. A more significant challenge arrived the following month: acquisition interest from a major healthcare corporation. HealthStream, a national company specializing in digital health solutions, approached with a substantial offer to purchase WellPath outright, integrating our platform into their existing suite of products while retaining our team under their corporate umbrella. The offer was financially extraordinary, well beyond standard valuation metrics for a company at our stage of development. The terms included generous retention packages for key team members, continued operational autonomy under their larger corporate structure, and expanded resources for accelerated platform development. Yet the prospect created profound ambivalence among our leadership team. Maya articulated the central concern during an emergency executive meeting. They're buying our technology and our expertise, but will they maintain our mission? Patient advocacy isn't exactly aligned with corporate healthcare priorities in most cases. This tension between expanded impact through corporate resources and potential compromise of our patient-centered mission dominated discussions over the following weeks. We conducted extensive due diligence on HealthStream's treatment of previous acquisitions, their corporate culture, and their actual implementation of stated values. Throughout this evaluation process, I reflected on how differently I approached this potential transaction compared to how I might have before illness transformed my priorities. Pre-diagnosis. Rebecca would have focused predominantly on financial, upside, and professional advancement. Post-transformation. Rebecca considered these factors but prioritized different questions. Would this serve our patients better than remaining independent? Would it advance or compromise our core mission? The decision-making process became an opportunity to implement the principles that had emerged through my personal journey, prioritizing authentic value over appearance, considering impact beyond immediate benefit, recognizing that genuine worth transcended financial metrics. We eventually declined HealthStream's initial offer, proposing instead a strategic partnership that would preserve WellPath's independence while creating collaborative opportunities. An invitation arrived from the National Patient Advocacy Conference, requesting a keynote address at their annual gathering, the most significant platform in the field, bringing together healthcare providers, policymakers, technology innovators, and patient representatives from across the country. The invitation specified interest in hearing about both WellPath's technological innovations and my personal journey as patient-turned-advocate, explicitly acknowledging the connection between lived experience and system transformation. The opportunity aligned perfectly with both professional goals and personal mission, offering a platform to influence healthcare approaches at an institutional level while validating the power of patient perspective in system design. Standing at the podium, looking out over this influential gathering, I experienced a momentary recognition of how completely life had transformed since those early days of diagnosis, when simply getting through each day had required extraordinary effort. The journey from isolated patient to healthcare innovation leader, from abandoned spouse to independent agent of change, represented evolution more profound than mere circumstantial improvement. I began my address not with WellPath's technological specifications or market position, but with the moment everything changed. 3 years ago, I sat in an examination room as a doctor explained that my body was attacking itself. That moment began a journey that would transform not just my health status, but my understanding of what healthcare can and should be. Without bitterness, but with unflinching honesty, I described how family members and my spouse had calculated their continued involvement against perceived costs, determining that a relationship with a chronically ill person represented a liability rather than an asset. I shared how this abandonment, while personally devastating, had revealed a fundamental truth about worthwhile connection: that genuine support emerges from recognition of inherent rather than instrumental value. The most profound insight from my patient journey wasn't about medical protocols or treatment efficacy. It was the recognition that healthcare occurs within a social context that profoundly impacts outcomes. When patients lose support systems, precisely when they most need them, as happens with disturbing frequency, their capacity to navigate complex care requirements diminishes dramatically. This perspective, connecting social support directly to medical outcomes, resonated visibly among the healthcare providers present. Heads nodded in recognition, notes were taken with increased intensity. This validation from medical professionals reinforced what experience had already taught: that personal insights derived from lived experience contained wisdom applicable beyond individual circumstance. During the reception following my keynote, healthcare leaders approached with implementation, questions, and partnership proposals. Most meaningfully, fellow patients shared how aspects of my story had articulated experiences they had struggled to communicate to providers and family members, expressing gratitude for public validation of challenges often ignored in clinical settings. As I prepared to leave the venue, a hotel staff member approached with a message. Someone was asking to speak with me privately if I could spare a few minutes. I agreed to a brief meeting in the hotel's executive lounge, a public space that offered both privacy and security. There, I found an elderly woman waiting alone at a corner table. As I approached, she stood with visible effort, her expression a complicated mixture of determination and uncertainty. "Ms. Mitchell," she began, extending a slightly trembling hand. "I'm Margaret Wilson. I attended your keynote yesterday, though we weren't formally introduced." The name registered immediately: Tom's mother, whom I had met only twice during our 8-year marriage. The family resemblance was subtle but unmistakable now that context provided recognition. "Mrs. Wilson," I acknowledged, accepting her handshake while processing this unexpected development. "This is certainly surprising." "I imagine so," she agreed, gesturing toward the opposite chair. "I won't take much of your time, but after hearing your speech, I felt compelled to speak with you directly. I appreciate you reaching out, though I'm curious how you happen to be at a healthcare conference." "I serve on a patient advisory board for Northwestern Memorial after my own cancer treatment 5 years ago. Your name wasn't in the program materials, just Rebecca Mitchell, WellPath founder, so I didn't make the connection until I saw you at the podium. 5 years ago, during my marriage to Tom, though I had never heard about her cancer, diagnosis, or treatment. The omission seemed significant, suggesting a pattern of family approach to illness predating my own experience. "I need to apologize to you, Rebecca," she continued. "Not for Thomas's behavior, he's responsible for his own actions, but for raising him with values that made those actions possible. When you described how your husband calculated his departure during your illness, you were describing behavior I modeled throughout Thomas's childhood. His father and I approached relationships as transactions, children as investments, marriage as strategic alliance. Her self-awareness was startlingly lucid, particularly coming from someone I had previously experienced as emotionally reserved. That's an unusually insightful perspective, I managed, genuinely impressed by her capacity for such critical self-examination. Facing mortality tends to clarify priorities, she observed with a hint of dry humor. My own illness experience forced recognition of how our family's approach to relationship had created isolation precisely when connection was most needed. I appreciate your candor, though I'm curious what you hope might come from this conversation. Nothing specific, she replied. I don't expect or request forgiveness or renewed connection. I simply felt an ethical obligation to acknowledge harm done, both through my son's actions and the family culture that normalized such calculation. Her lack of specific expectation, the absence of requested outcome or implicit obligation, distinguished this interaction from previous family communications. Unlike their opportunistic reconnection attempts following my success, Margaret Wilson's approach contained no discernible advantage-seeking. "Thank you for that acknowledgement," I said finally. "It's more meaningful than you might realize, particularly given how rare genuine accountability seems to be in these situations." As she prepared to leave, curiosity prompted one final question. "Does Tom know you're here? That we've spoken?" "No," she replied without hesitation. "Our relationship has been strained since my illness revealed similar patterns to what you experienced. We maintain obligatory contact but limited meaningful connection." This final revelation completed the picture of a generational pattern, calculation and abandonment repeating across relationships, creating isolation rooted in a transactional approach to human connection. The awareness created unexpected empathy not just for Margaret Wilson, but even slightly for Tom himself. Not excusing his choices, but contextualizing them within a legacy of learned behavior. Returning home from the conference, I reflected on the extraordinary journey from diagnosis through abandonment to rebuilding and now influence. The path had never been linear, but rather a spiral returning to similar points with entirely new perspectives, each challenge contributing to an integrated understanding that transformed subsequent experience. The evening of my return, I sat on my terrace overlooking the lake, watching sunset colors reflect on water that mirrored the changing sky. In this peaceful moment of reflection, I recognized with profound clarity that my family's abandonment, while uniquely painful in its timing and execution, had ultimately freed me from relationships that diminished rather than enhanced my humanity. Their calculated departure, intended to protect their convenience and financial stability, had inadvertently given me the greatest gift possible: the opportunity to discover genuine value beyond others' assessment, to build connections based on authentic care rather than obligation, to create purpose aligned with intrinsic rather than instrumental worth. As darkness settled over the lake and lights from neighboring homes created a constellation of human presence along the shore, I embraced the profound paradox at the center of my journey. What had begun as devastating abandonment had become a pathway to liberation. What had started as medical crisis had evolved into a source of wisdom. What had initially appeared as an ending had ultimately revealed itself as a beginning. In calculating that I was a liability rather than an asset, my family had inadvertently released me to discover value that transcended calculation entirely. The inherent, immeasurable worth that exists independent of others' assessment or approval. That discovery, more than remission, more than professional success, more than financial security, represented the true treasure emerging from the crucible of illness and abandonment. The dinner that had begun as reconciliation with family, who had abandoned me, had actually facilitated deeper reconciliation with myself. Integration of vulnerability and strength, acceptance of limitation and possibility, recognition of inherent worth beyond others' calculation. This internal coherence, more than any external validation or achievement, represented the true measure of healing, the capacity to embrace wholeness that included rather than denied the difficult journey that had shaped but not defined the person I had become. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.